I was in my late 20s and I had been to California once or twice for very short visits. And I decided, you know what? It's nice and warm there. I'm going to move to San Francisco. But my dad, he warns me. He says, don't go to San Francisco, man. It is the land of fruits and nuts. Well, in those days, a fruit was a gay person, but the gay word gay just didn't exist at that time. Gays were either queers, faggots, or fruits. In any event, I moved to California. I rented a place in San Francisco, and to my surprise, it was a different world. You might call it a brave new world. For one thing, there had been a confluence of several events. One of them, strangely enough, was the invention of the contraceptive pill. And then the other thing that was happening was the hippie movement. So you saw a lot of really good looking women, we called them girls in those days. That wasn't considered a nasty thing to do, to call a good looking girl a girl. In any event, good looking girls would be wearing these cotton print tie-dye dresses with nothing on inside, no underwear, and they were walking on the street, and they were very open to, you know, I don't want to get censored here on YouTube, so I'll just say they were open to, especially since there was the pill. They'd become like, men in their attitudes toward sex. Okay, the other thing was marijuana. Now, in California in those days, it seemed to me everybody was smoking marijuana just like cigarettes. Now, I wasn't a smoker, so I didn't go for marijuana, but we heard that in Texas, for instance, people were getting sentenced for 10 years in jail for having one marijuana cigarette. They called them a roach in those days. But I wasn't interested in that. But I made friends rather rapidly, and one of the things that I did was I became an early founding member of the California Libertarian Party. And that brought me in contact with all sorts of interesting people who were also just starting out in politics. There was Dianne Feinstein, who was later to become the mayor of San Francisco, and she was very liberal, had a lot of support from the gays. There was Ronald Reagan. He was the only president I ever knew, but long before he became president, he was very much a libertarian. Now, I don't want to take full credit for it, but once I was talking to Ronald Reagan when he was obviously not yet governor of California, and I said, hey, you know what a good slogan in politics would be? Government is not the solution. Government is the problem, not the solution. And he went on to use that very successfully. But when he became president, well, unfortunately, I guess when you're a revolutionary and you're outside the system, you can say lots of things that are later that appear to you to be irresponsible. But anyway, he was definitely in favor of limited to no government, fire 99% of all government employees. But once he got elected, things changed. Okay, so now we're talking about, I come to San Francisco. The sexual opportunities were unlimited. Now, remember in another video I said that the different minorities had their own world. And I wandered over to a place called Polk Street, and that was the gay capital of the world. And it was a little bit unbelievable because there were gay restaurants. Now, non-gays, that we called them straight, I was straight, were welcome in these places, and there was no hostility that I could see by the gays to straight people. So there was theaters. There must have been a half a dozen plays that were musicals and dancing and funny costumes by gays. It was a really a new world, a new experience. Forget in New York or Chicago, nothing like that. There were lots of girls holding hands with other ladies, and in those days, as I remember, today when you see two lesbians, usually they're, they look about the same. But in those days, it was usually a younger, quite attractive, pretty girl with a very hefty, older woman, very dressed like a man in a usually a suit and a tie, and they used to call them dykes. And so the typical lesbian couple, at least the visible ones, were these the dyke and the attractive young girl. I don't know what to say. I'm just passing along my observation. All right, now remember I told you that everybody was smoking marijuana. So I made friends with a young lady who worked in a mental institution, and all her friends were doctors and psychiatrists. And she said, well, if you don't like to smoke, why don't you try some marijuana brownies? So I tried marijuana brownies, and wow, it was like going to a psychoanalyst. All my fears and hopes, everything came to me in visions. I could look at a picture and the picture would talk to me. I could listen to music and the music spoke to me. It's hard to say, to describe it exactly, because it's the sort of thing you have to experience. Now here's what happened shortly after. People who were smoking marijuana began to get boils on the inside of their mouth, blisters and boils, and they got sick. And the word came out that Mexico, with the sponsorship of the U.S. government, was spraying all the marijuana crops with a poison called paraquat. And paraquat, it turned the leaves brown, but the people who were growing it didn't want to lose their harvest, so even though these leaves were poisoned, they cut them and sold them, and a lot of them went to California where they were smoked. But the only problem, well, not the only problem, because they also got you sick. But with all these boils, all you had to do is smoke one joint or eat a marijuana brownie, and you got these terrible blisters in your mouth. So really, marijuana consumption fell off by 99% in a week. And then what happened was something quite interesting. My girlfriend of the day came back home with a bag of white powder, and she says, hey, marijuana is out, but coke is in. And she had a little tiny itty bitty spoon, and we got and sniffed it. Oh wait, no, the spoon came later. You cut up this white powder on a mirror, and you made a little tube out of was supposed to be $100 bill, but I never had any $100 bills, so I had a $1 bill. And you sniffed up that powder, and it was kind of interesting. You felt like dancing, you felt quite energetic. It was like 20 cups of coffee. And in a matter of weeks, cocaine replaced marijuana, as you might say, the drug of choice. And it also made women very sexy. They wanted to make love as soon as they had a few sniffs. And guys were always sexy, as you probably know. In any event, moving on, the introduction of cocaine was, well, I'd say definitely a negative, because what happened was, instead of the Mexican marijuana dealers who were very mellow. We got in these Colombians, and they were just the opposite. They were very vicious people who they killed people. It was a lot of crime, mostly between the dealers and their customers who didn't pay. But for the historical record, the reason that cocaine became popular was the spraying of the marijuana crops with paraquat. Well, one of the nice things about getting into politics is you meet all kinds of interesting people. And so I was, for a little while, a big cheese in the Libertarian Party, which was just starting. In fact, I even ran for Vice President of the United States. I used to joke that I was 6 heartbeats away from being president. Well, I was actually a lot more than that. But getting remember I told you about cocaine replacing marijuana. Well, it was also a time when another drug came into play, and it was considered a dangerous drug, so I never took it. It was called LSD, and the Beatles supposedly wrote a song about it called Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. And LSD was a powerful hallucinogen which made you see visions, made some people think they could fly, and they even jumped off roofs to demonstrate how they could fly. But obviously they couldn't, so they had an unexpected ending. In any end, as I progressed in the Libertarian Party, somebody came up to me and said, there's somebody you gotta meet, Stanley Owsley. Owsley is making all kinds of money, and he's a libertarian, and he wants to meet you, and he's the inventor of LSD. And the funny thing is, LSD was legal before it was made illegal. And so Stanley Owsley said, hey, LSD doesn't hurt anybody. I've been taking it for years. And then he proceeded to tell me how he discovered it and how he made it and how it was marketed now all over the world legally. And he was a multimillionaire as a result. And he also was interested in sound. He provided the loudspeakers and stuff for major concerts. It was called the Wall of Sound. And I remember him inviting me to a concert. Who's a competitor of the Beatles at the time? Oh, they're still around.
Rolling Stones.
Rolling Stones, that was it. So I think he made the Wall of Sound for the Rolling Stones, and then other big outfits of the day. Ooh, what's this? Nothing special. Okay. So this Stanley Owsley said he was a student at MIT, and his buddy or roommate was a guy called Timothy O'Leary, or maybe Timothy Leary, and he read a review by a German chemist who discovered a drug made out of the green mold on bread, the same thing that penicillin comes from. And if you did all the right things to refine this drug and took a pill, well, it wasn't even a pill, it was like a flake. It was a blue flake, and you put it on your tongue. Within a few minutes, you had all the symptoms of schizophrenia. So, I bet you guys watching this don't realize that when you take LSD, and I'm not sure anybody's taking it anymore, but you immediately become a schizophrenic. And you see visions, and you feel persecuted, but at the same time, if you're in a good mood, everything that you've always wanted seems to come true. Okay, now the public view was that LSD was a very dangerous drug, and he said to me, well, it's not dangerous. I've been taking it for years. And I got to know Stanley pretty well, went over to his house, and he showed me his bedroom. And it wasn't a seduction. His bedroom was a big lead coffin. Wow. I said, what's this? He says, well, I sleep in this thing, and I put the lead hood over, because he had some name for them. Let's call them the bing bongs from outer space come at you at night, and they occupy your body. And I said, huh? Well, I didn't want to challenge him or get in any arguments with him, but I decided, well, I'm not going to take too much LSD. Well, time passed, and I became buddies with another philosopher. He introduced Zen to California. His name was Alan Watts. And Alan said, gee, you really have to try LSD. He says, it's wonderful. He says, you take a piece of moldy wood, for instance, and you see the green mold on it and bugs crawling around it, and it turns out that this is the most beautiful, beautiful thing in the world. And so reluctantly, you might say, I decided, okay, I'm going to try some LSD, and Alan Watts, he can be my trip sitter. That's what you needed, because the first time you take it, you don't know what you're going to do, and nobody knows what you're going to do, because, it's a pretty serious drug. Okay, so I took this LSD, and I'll say what happened for another day, but I do remember that what happened was a few days later, I was watering the lawn, my own lawn, and I was looking at the bubbles coming out of the hose. Ooh, those bubbles, those bubbles were the most beautiful bubbles in the world. And wow, what have I been missing? Oh, I could become a great artist, a great musician, a great anything, if I just took some more of that wonderful LSD.